Welcome to Class 11 in our Blueprint for Liberty series. In this class, we're going to discuss what John Birch Society founder Robert Welch referred to as the master conspiracy, a conspiracy against God and man to create a godless and centralized one world government. And we're going to begin in the beginning, in the Garden of Eden. Ye shall be as gods. That was the catastrophic lie that induced our first parents to fall from grace. And mankind has been rebelling against his creator ever since. The first attempt at world government sought to build a tower to heaven so Nimrod could set himself up as a god. That too met with failure. Yet man didn't learn. The pharaohs of Egypt and the Caesars of Rome called themselves gods. Meanwhile, materialism corrupted ancient Greece, from the atomism of Democritus to the hedonism of Epicurus, from the rationalism of Parmenides to the naturalism of Lucretius. These philosophies glorified both man's intellect and the physical world. In rejecting God, they negated moral accountability. The dawn of Christendom exposed these frauds. Augustinianism and Thomistic scholasticism blended Aristotle's ethics and aspects of Plato's rationalism with Christian theology to reveal that rational arguments defend God, creationism, and morality rather than opposing them. False philosophies were therefore marginalized in the early centuries of Christendom, and Roger Bacon sparked empirical observation for scientific study within a Christian framework. But evil continued to whisper false promises until it found a follower in 12th century philosopher Peter Abelard, who was the first to secularize education, thereby divorcing it from its true goal, the practice of moral virtue. Godless education spawned the likes of Italian philosopher Francis Petrarch, who laid the foundations of secular humanism in the 14th century. Next came Niccolò Machiavelli, reputed to be the father of modern political science, who preached situation ethics, or the end justifies the means, and argued that religion is man-made. He emancipated politics from theology and morals to the later detriment of all mankind. English philosopher Francis Bacon went even further in the 16th century, theorizing that truth can be determined from our own intellects. His empiricism was the inspiration for the so-called Enlightenment of the 16th and 17th centuries, a time when atheism took root and has flourished ever since. René Descartes summed up their heresy with his infamous illogic, "I think, therefore I am," which credits man himself with his own creation. These troublemakers found their home in the Freemasonic lodges of Europe, a network born from medieval stonemasons' guilds. But by the end of the 18th century, they'd transformed into centers of godless philosophical thought, masked in secrecy. They'd already established such strong foothold in government that William Pitt, Earl of Chatham, and former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, complained of them in 1770 to the House of Lords. All the obstacles and difficulties which attended every great public and popular measure arose not from those who were out of place. They were formed, improved, and supported by that invisible influence I've mentioned, and by the industry of those very dependents, first by secret treachery, then by official influence, afterwards in public councils. A long train of such practices has at length unwillingly convinced me that there's something within the court greater than the king himself. The dark history of these secret societies is told in two books, researched and published simultaneously in 1798, though the authors were unaware of one another. England's John Robison wrote Proofs of a Conspiracy against all the religions and governments of Europe, carried on in the secret meetings of Freemasons, Illuminati, and reading societies. Abbé Barruel of France penned memoirs illustrating the history of Jacobinism. Jacobin was one of many names used by the Enlightenment charlatans to give the impression that they were many splintered groups rather than a tightly knit cadre of plotters. Of the principal actors in the conspiracy, Abbé Barruel writes, about the middle of this century appeared three men who were leagued in the most inveterate hatred against Christianity. These were Voltaire, D'Alembert, and Frederick II, King of Prussia. Men like these established lodges, which would become the network exploited by Adam Weishaupt to establish his Bavarian Illuminati. He founded it on May 1st, 1776, a date still commemorated by socialists worldwide as May Day, also known as International Workers' Day. An Illuminist duty is not to God, but to the order. Its goal is the destruction of thrones and altars, a new world order. In Discourse for the Mysteries, Weishaupt wrote, "Princes and nations shall disappear from the face of the earth, and this revolution shall be the work of secret societies." The idea was to achieve a stealthy infiltration of governments by a cabal of enlightened men, absorbing nations into secular humanism under the guidance of this secret ruling body. Robeson identified the 6 tactics of the Illuminati: destruction of government, private property, inheritance, patriotism, religion and morality, and the family, by undermining marriage and the education of children. Their first conquest was one of the most brutal ever witnessed on Earth. France bore the brunt of their venom in the late 18th century's reign of terror. Christianity was abolished. The cult of reason became the official state religion, and these monsters enthroned a well-known prostitute as the goddess of reason on the high altar of Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. Stateside, when President George Washington sent troops to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania in 1794 to put down the Whiskey Rebellion, they found French flags flying over the courthouse, a hat tip to the French Revolution. George Washington wrote, "I consider this insurrection as the first formidable fruit of the democratic societies," which was another of their many names. Our nation's first Chief Justice, John Jay, wrote of the Whiskey Rebellion, "I suspect that the Jacobins are still more numerous, more desperate, and more active in this country than is generally supposed." Other Illuminist-inspired revolutions swept across Europe during the 19th century, uprooting Christendom and replacing it with godless, secular republics. The Napoleonic Wars caused the dissolution of the Holy Roman Empire, and revolutions throughout the 1800s uprooted traditional institutions and customs. These were not grassroots movements, but well-funded 19th century astroturfing, which exploited the commoners whom the revolutionists claimed to champion. The average person was thereby completely deprived of the Christian state framework that had, until then, defended him against exploitation by its enemies. On July 14, 1856, British statesman Benjamin Disraeli openly complained about these activities and motives to England's House of Commons. He said, "It is useless to deny, because it is impossible to conceal, that a great part of Europe, the whole of Italy and France, and a great portion of Germany, to say nothing of other countries, is covered with a network of these secret societies, just as the superficies or surface of the earth is now being covered with railroads." And what are their objects? They do not attempt to conceal them. They do not want constitutional government. They do not want ameliorated or better institutions. They want to change the tenor of land, to drive out the present owners of the soil, and to put an end to ecclesiastical establishments. He would go on to say, "The world is governed by very different personages from what is imagined by those who are not behind the scenes." In Italy, the conspirators went by the name of Carbonari. Their leader, Giuseppe Mazzini, succeeded Weishaupt as head of the Illuminati. Wherever his group established foothold, education was secularized, goods of religious orders were confiscated, churches were crushed with taxes, matrimony was secularized and divorce legalized, and candidates for the priesthood were conscripted to military service. To get any situation of value or prestige, you had to be a Freemason or at least have powerful Masonic influence working for you. The master conspiracy also spawned the communist movement with publication of their manifesto in 1848. It preached the destruction of the old order and construction of a new world order. The first edition of the Communist Manifesto was printed in London, where Karl Marx was living in exile because both Germany and France had booted him for his radicalism. Who funded that printing and the document's subsequent translation within a few years into 30 languages and hundreds of editions? Was it the working poor of Germany or the peasants of Russia? No, it was international bankers like the Rothschilds who also perfected the art of funding both sides of wars to embroil governments in foreign disputes while stirring civil unrest within their borders. What they started has continued as the game plan of international bankers ever since. Meanwhile, Charles Darwin was busy dusting off the naturalism of ancient Greece. In the 6th century, Anaximander proposed that life originated from water, and humans evolved from these simpler creatures. Democritus and Epicurus developed atomism, the belief that tiny particles came together in a void to result in life. Darwin borrowed these ideas to formulate the so-called theories of evolution and natural selection, explicitly rejecting the supernatural. His erroneous ideas have nevertheless replaced biblical creationism as the scientific norm. Darwin's co-conspirators in England founded the Fabian Society in 1884. Their logo is blatantly descriptive, a wolf in sheep's clothing. The John Birch Society's founder, Robert Welch, credited the Fabians with making England easy prey for absorption into the New World Order. We were easy prey too with the launch of the federal bureaucracy. Our U.S. government had remained relatively small until 1849 with the launch of the U.S. Department of the Interior, which was established not just to maintain federal lands, but to control the resources on them, such as water, timber, minerals, and land use. The first Republican president, Abraham Lincoln, next founded the Department of Agriculture in 1862, establishing corporate welfare. Today, more than 400 agencies and sub-agencies make up the executive branch of our government. Social Democrats, led by E.M. Stanton, likewise orchestrated the U.S. Civil War and the destructive Reconstruction that followed. Throughout the rest of the 19th century, our bureaucracy grew at an alarming rate, adding agencies such as the Interstate Commerce Commission, reputedly to regulate railroads so they wouldn't fleece customers. It actually put small rail lines out of business and established relative monopolies for large corporations. The same script was later followed for trucking and air transportation and for other industries with corresponding bureaucratic shackles to stifle them. Meanwhile, the international bankers financing these government takeovers were busy hijacking our monetary system, which at the time was gold-based. But in 1910, Jekyll Island, Georgia, witnessed a meeting where Wall Street laid the foundation of the Federal Reserve System. It's a private banking cartel established in 1913, and it operates under the protection of the federal government. These are the men who took our gold and gave us paper in return. It was more than coincidence that during the same year, the conspirators managed to impose the Marxist federal income tax and direct election of U.S. senators, moves calculated to subject all Americans to slavery that we had supposedly fought a war to defeat. They continued whittling away at our Constitution with amendments that continued to undermine our government. Today, the international banking cartel operates the Bank of International Settlements. Founded in 1930, it is the Bank of Central Banks and is protected by an international treaty. No government has jurisdiction over it. No economic crisis touches it. Its profits are tax-free. It financed both sides in most wars beginning with World War II and was behind the launch of the euro in 2002. Many familiar names have been involved: the Rockefeller family, the Ford Foundation, the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, named for Andrew Carnegie, and J.P. Morgan. Americans like Jacob Schiff and William Boyce Thompson financed the revolutionaries Leon Trotsky and Vladimir Lenin, and others would follow suit with Joseph Stalin, making possible the Russian Revolution and its aftermath, which established communist rule and murdered millions in the process. Rockefeller was among the many financiers of Margaret Sanger and Planned Parenthood, which has reached its perversions to the corners of the world. Religious subversion took place through the establishment of the National Council of Churches in 1908 and the World Council of Churches in 1948. It's worth noting that these involve only Christian denominations, and both organizations call for world government under the UN, not under God. Here's a measure of their effectiveness. In 1953, former Communist Party USA official Manning Johnson told Congress that the Methodist minister and Christian socialist Reverend Harry F. Ward, founder of the ACLU, had been the chief architect for communist infiltration and subversion in the religious field. He infiltrated seminaries with agents to achieve betrayal from within. Already by that year, more than 3% of American Protestant clergymen were communist. The U.S. House and the New York State Legislature had investigated the ACLU in the 1920s and 30s and determined that it was a communist front organization. During those same 1953 congressional investigations, Norman Dodd was peppering the head of the Ford Foundation with questions about dubious funding of communist causes by tax-exempt foundations like his. He got this perturbed confession out of Rowan Gaither Jr.
Rowan Gaither was at that time president of the Ford Foundation. Mr. Gaither said, "Mr. Dodd, we've asked you to come up here today because we thought that possibly off the record you would tell us why the Congress is interested in the activities of foundations such as ourselves." And before I could think of how I would reply to that statement, Mr. Gaither then went on, "We shall use our grant-making power so to alter life in the United States that it can be comfortably merged with the Soviet Union." I said, "Of course, legally you're entitled to make grants for this purpose, but I don't think you're entitled to withhold that information from the people of the country to whom you're indebted for your tax exemption. So why don't you tell the people of the country that's what you told me?" And his answer was, "We would not think of doing any such thing."
Education fell under the Illuminist sickle, too. Horace Mann, the father of American public education, took education out of the hands of parents and turned it over to the state. These changes were whitewashed with terms like reform and modern and sophisticated. The Horace Mann of Europe was German philosopher George Hegel, who believed that the state, the government, is God. Hegel was Marx's inspiration. Horace Mann inspired John Dewey, who helped implement a Marxist system of education in Russia in 1928, and then returned to the United States to become president of the National Education Association. Under his vision, education became utilitarian rather than formative. Dewey taught kids what to think, not how to think, and schools became a breeding ground for the nanny state. Dewey was one of the founders of the Council on Foreign Relations. It's a modern version of the philosophical societies of the 17th and 18th centuries and a breeding ground for insiders. With one exception, every U.S. Secretary of State since 1940 has been a CFR or Trilateral Commission member, or both. Trilateral is an international version of the U.S. CFR. Each Secretary of War or Defense, nearly all CIA directors, and every key U.S. national security and foreign policy advisor has been a CFR member since that time. The CFR logo is as interesting as the Fabians, though slightly less obvious. On the scroll beneath the horse is the Latin word ubique, which means everywhere or omnipresent. They bragged in 1921 that they were already everywhere. We found out for certain in 1922 when local and state law enforcement officers in Michigan raided the secret convention of the Communist Party of America. The book Reds in America by R.M. Whitney describes the incident. The documents they seized proved infiltration in every political party at the time, every trade, labor, and agricultural union, the feminist movement, news and media, stage and screen, schools and universities, the American military. The cancer was growing at a healthy pace within every branch and agency of the federal government, especially the departments of state and the Treasury. These were the men who always made sure their puppets occupied the White House. Presidential advisors like John Foster Dulles and Edward Mandell House helped form the World Government Trial-Run League of Nations under Woodrow Wilson. When the U.S. didn't fall for that ruse, They and others from the Wilson administration formed the Council on Foreign Relations with the goal of eventually placing the United States under a one-world government system. They and other CFR members came back into power with the FDR administration. These same conspirators met in 1944 at the Dumbarton Oaks Conference, which laid the groundwork for fulfillment of their plans for one world government by founding the United Nations in 1945. Dulles hand-picked Alger Hiss to lead the U.S. delegation to the founding conference of the UN. He was one of 47 CFR members in that delegation, and within 5 years, America would learn that Hiss was a communist spy convicted in 1950 on 2 counts of perjury for his espionage activities. Dulles also helped write the UN Charter, shaping the preamble's language with an emphasis on peace, human rights, and international cooperation. He was a master of doublespeak. Shortly before that, however, the disastrous administration of Franklin Delano Roosevelt had completed the bureaucratic conquest of the United States. We also have FDR to thank for making the Illuminati's emblem familiar to all Americans. His administration placed the reverse of the Great Seal of the United States on the $1 bill in 1935. Until then, most people were unaware of its existence. His Secretary of Agriculture and later Vice President, Henry Wallace, brought it to FDR's attention, later describing the incident in a letter. Roosevelt was at first struck with the representation of the all-seeing eye, a Masonic representation of the great architect of the universe, Wallace wrote. Roosevelt, like myself, was a 32nd degree Mason. He suggested that the seal be put on the dollar bill. Incidentally, Wallace ran for president in 1948 as the Progressive Party candidate. The Communist Party USA endorsed him, and he welcomed their support. Since then, under the watch of the supposed peacekeeping United Nations, communism has spread across the globe. Its forces have U.S. officials to thank for their success. General Dwight Eisenhower, a CFR member, and our State Department helped Stalin liberate Eastern Europe, abandoning those countries to communist atrocities. As president, Eisenhower would send American soldiers to slaughter in Vietnam, though Congress never declared war. Edward Lansdale was a subversive agent in the State Department and arranged money and resources for Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam. George Marshall, the same U.S. general who sacrificed Pearl Harbor to the Japanese, made Mao Zedong's conquest of China a reality. And CFR member Zbigniew Brzezinski ensured the financing for Pol Pot's killing fields in Cambodia. These were the kinds of betrayals that prompted Senator Joseph McCarthy to warn America of communist infiltrators. His were not original investigations. He was simply trying to report information that others had discovered, but that was stifled by the conspirators. For his heroism, he's still maligned today with the disparaging term McCarthyism, which has even been added to our dictionaries. As we've seen, McCarthy's charges were anything but unsubstantiated, as Illuminist influence has only grown. None other than President John F. Kennedy acknowledged it in a 1961 address.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed.
Lest anyone doubt the Illuminist origins of that conspiracy, its adherents continually repeat its New World Order mantra throughout the decades. In 1976, on the 200th anniversary of the signing of our Declaration of Independence, more than 100 members of Congress signed the Declaration of Interdependence, which was written by one of McCarthy's most venomous attackers, Henry Steele Commager. Among its red flags is the statement, 2 centuries ago, our forefathers brought forth a new nation. Now we must join together with others to bring forth a new world order. Even the reputedly conservative Reagan administration was filled with members of the CFR and Trilateral Commission. David Rockefeller was one of President Ronald Reagan's most ardent supporters. The day Reagan died, his vice president and successor, George H.W. Bush, told reporters,
"A lot happened on his watch that was very, very positive towards a new world order."
When he became president, Bush addressed Congress on the threshold of the Persian Gulf War, naming 5 objectives of U.S.-led military involvement in the Mideast conflict, including the establishment of a new world order and military merger of countries under command of the UN Security Council. He stated,
"Out of these troubled times, our 5th objective, a new world order, can emerge, a new era, freer from the threat of terror, stronger in the pursuit of justice, and more secure in the quest for peace."
In a 2003 address at the Kennedy Center, former President Bill Clinton said,
President Bush said, and it's a phrase that I often use myself, that we needed a new world order.
In 2009, when the CFR opened a new office in Washington, D.C., his wife, then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, admitted,
"I am delighted to be here in these new headquarters. I have been often to, the mothership in New York City, but it's good to have an outpost of the council right here down the street from the State Department. We get a lot of advice from the council, so this will mean I won't have as far to go to be told what we should be doing and how we should think about the future."
Biden wrote a Wall Street Journal editorial in 1992 entitled, "How I Learned to Love the New World Order." As vice president, he addressed the Export-Import Bank in 2013, saying,
"The affirmative task we have now is to actually create a new world order, because the global order is changing again. And the institutions and rules that worked so well in the post-World War II era for decades, they need to be strengthened, and some have to be changed."
During a speech to the CEOs of the Business Roundtable in 2022, Biden said,
"And now is the time when things are shifting. There's going to be a new world order out there, and we've got to lead it. And we've got to unite the rest of the free world in doing it."
New World Order aside, the conspirators also incredibly linked themselves to that first disastrous attempt at world government. In 1992, the Council of Europe unveiled a promotional poster to announce construction of the European Parliament building. It includes a comic representation of Peter Bruegel's famous Renaissance painting of the Tower of Babel. The inverted pentagrams floating above it are said to correspond to the European flag's circle of 12 stars, but few miss the occult symbolism, tied as it is to the tower and its message of defiance against God. Today, the actual building in Strasbourg amounts to the same clenched fist. And World Economic Forum top advisor Dr. Yuval Noah Harari talks about building digital dictatorships in which elites control humans by hacking them. He told the World Economic Forum in 2018,
"Science is replacing evolution by natural selection with evolution by intelligent design. Not the intelligent design of some god above the clouds, but our intelligent design and the intelligent design of our clouds, the IBM cloud, the Microsoft cloud. These are the new driving forces of evolution."
We already know what the outcome of their efforts will be if they're successful. But Robert Welch founded the John Birch Society to thwart this master conspiracy. We urge you to join us in our quest for less government, more responsibility, and with God's help, a better world. This concludes Class 11 about the conspiracy. In the next Blueprint for Liberty class, JBS Field Coordinator Dave Giordano will discuss the importance of the need to organize, which is essential if we are to stop this conspiracy.